We're sisters, best friends, and authors on a mission to help you stoke your creative fire and live the life of your dreams. We believe that purpose fuels passion and that creativity is your secret weapon for mass construction. There's never been a better time to bless the world with your dream realized. You're listening to The Kate and Abbie Show. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Kate and Abbie Show. Today we're talking about a big topic, a topic that many writers struggle with, which is writing description. How to nail your descriptions and create vibrant, colorful, meaningful, and intriguing descriptions that move the story forward and that matter, basically, to your story, right? We want to write descriptions that matter so that every single moment of your story is engaging to your reader. It's not just, we're trying to get through this description to get to the good stuff, right? You never want your reader to feel that way. So we are going to tackle this topic today, how to write description in such a way that makes your reader engaged constantly with the story and also helps them to unravel new layers of your story as they go, and to see things in your description so that you can show your reader rather than tell them what to feel and how to think about these characters and what's going on. So obviously it's a huge topic and we're going to break it down into different sections today and discuss those sections, just like our favorite techniques and methods for nailing your descriptions and making every moment of your story engaging. So we're going to dive into that in a minute. But first, we have to thank our sponsors, who are you guys. You are the ones who support this show and keep it going. And we so appreciate your help and your support. So if you get value out of this podcast, go to patreon.com/The Kate and Abbie Show and help us keep this show alive and free of interruptions. Okay, so let's dive straight into it. The very first and probably most important tip that we can offer you guys is kind of like a principle of descriptions, really, which is that when you are describing something, and I've talked about this on my channel before, when you're describing something, you are bringing the reader's focus to that one thing. Exactly. You're almost like zooming into it, and cropping everything else out is one way to think of it.
That's a good way to think of it, actually. Yeah, because unlike in film, when you're writing, all the reader can focus on is exactly what you're saying just then. They don't have an opportunity to look at something else or focus on something else. Yeah. They're focused in on that one sentence that they're reading. And so you have to ask yourself, is this where I want them to be focused? Because I'm the one directing their focus here as the author. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's so true. And you can use that as a tool, not as a limiter. So don't think of it as now I have to focus on, when I write a line about something, it's bringing the reader's attention to that one thing, but I want to paint this larger picture. You can still paint a larger picture, and it's all through really style and pacing, I would say. And it's obviously what comes into play here is character voice as well, but we're going to get into that in a minute. First, imagine your description is visual. So let's say you're describing a very particular element of a scene. Like you're writing a scene where your main character walks into a room, picks up a piece of mail on their table that came in while they were out, somebody else brought the mail in, and they see a letter that's addressed to them and they know who it's from, and you are describing what the front of the letter looks like, and maybe the handwriting and maybe some scuff marks on the envelope. Now we're very zoomed into that image. If you could take that description and make it an image, a picture, you would be zoomed into that one thing, right? And so you don't necessarily want to bring the reader's focus then to, the room is filled with morning sunlight and the kettle is on the stove and the cat is sleeping on the windowsill. Does any of that matter, really? Because if the character is going through something emotional here while they pick up this letter that's to them, they know who it's from, and it's a more of an internal moment where your character's feeling something and engaging with a particular part of their world, then do we need to describe other parts of their world in this moment?
Right, exactly.
So not saying that you shouldn't, but that's the question that you should ask yourself for sure, because if we start describing the tea kettle and the cat and the sunlight, our attention now goes to those other pictures.
Exactly.
You know? And this is, of course, a very basic, like, fundamental rule of writing, but not a lot of writers, like, stop to ponder it like that.
Right, because you are trying to describe everything that's going on. You know, you're like, okay, well, I need to set the mood. But really ask yourself, the mood isn't just set by the physical things and the physical setting. Especially if it's an emotional scene, you want to be focusing more, like you were saying, on the internal conflict, not so much on the mood. And it really doesn't take many words to describe a setting either. You really don't need much to quickly set the scene of where they are. Maybe just saying the room is sunlit rather than describing the way the sun is coming through the window, describing the cat sitting on the windowsill, describing the kettle going, you know. I walk into the sunlit kitchen. Okay, and that now we as the reader get to kind of decide what that looks like rather than having every single piece sort of painted out for us.
Right, yeah. And I find sometimes it's a fun challenge just to challenge yourself to, like, how can I describe this with as few words as possible? Like, I try to do that depending on the character voice and stuff. It really depends. But a lot of times I try to think, you know, what is really going on here? How can I describe this in as few words as possible and paint still a vivid picture? Right. And this is something that you and I have discussed a lot that you see in screenplays, which is actually our second point on our list here, is to study screenplays and films, but especially how screenplays are written. Because a lot of times screenplays are strategically written in such a way that you're not going into huge descriptions, even though in the finished product of the film, you will have very rich settings and moods and lighting, but that's more of something that happens in more of the artistic development as the film comes together, as far as setting and lighting and set design and stuff like that. But the writing aspect, the screenplay itself, oftentimes has very short, to the point descriptions. You will never read a screenplay that has, at least one that's been like greenlit for film, you'll never read a screenplay and encounter huge, long descriptions, because that's not the point of a screenplay. A screenplay's point is to paint enough of the picture that we can convey this idea to another creative individual who can then help to put the picture together. And to express that and illustrate that. And so what I find really interesting, especially for watching or reading screenplays after you've watched the film that it's for, is to notice how the screenwriter used very few words to describe something extremely visual, you know, and how you still have that visual image even without all the description.
Right.
It's really interesting. And I talked about this one time in a video on my channel that's about pacing and description. Definitely check that one out, because that's a great companion to this video. But in that video, I talk about, I mentioned the screenplay of Dunkirk, the film Dunkirk, and I think I've mentioned it on the podcast too. And it inspired me because the first line of that screenplay is painting the picture of the opening scene. And all it says is papers falling like snow, and then continues to describe what the street looks like. But I thought that's such a cool, short and sharp description that just immediately puts you there. I mean, you can see it, right?
Right.
And that's what you want your reader. You want your reader to see it.
And me and you always talk about how what you really want in a description is a short, sharp description that's like, that's how I've always wanted to describe that thing and just didn't know the right words.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That feeling of like, that is the way to describe that.
Yeah.
It's only a few words. It's
usually
like
it's
the
not
most accurate way to say that. And it just hits home rather than the longest way to say it. Mm-hmm. More isn't always necessarily better. Yeah. With description, less is more typically.
Yeah, it's very true. And to that point, the next item on our list is to use description like seasoning, which I love that. I love that because it really is, you know, it's seasoning. It's not something that you want to pile on your story because you want to use it to enrich what's happening, not to distract from it, especially since, as you guys know, I talk about this all the time, story is not about what happens, it's about how what happens affects and transforms the characters. So that's about internal journeys, right? What is the internal journey that your character is on, and how can we emphasize that through description?
Exactly. Yeah. And as far as setting the mood, because I think that might be something that a lot of writers think, well, how do I describe the fact that it's like, a rainy, stormy day and, they're sitting in the library and the fire's crackling and it's like really dark academia and I want to get that feeling across for that scene. Well, think of what is the sharpest way you can describe that, and only describe it when you are setting the mood, because that's when it matters. Think about, when does this matter? Okay, it matters when they first walk in. Right. Now, what we can encounter a lot in various writing that I've seen anyway, is that we start, and I've been guilty of this in my own writing, is we start describing it. We set the mood. We describe it when the character first comes in. We understand that the fire's crackling, that the rain is pattering against the window, and now we set into dialogue. Okay, we as the reader already know the setting. And then in between dialogue here and there, it's like the fire snaps, the rain patters against the window, the wind is blowing outside. We already know all these things. Right. And now what's happening? And of course, there's places to sprinkle that in, like we're saying, seasoning. But when we mention it too much, what it actually starts to do is slow down the progression of the scene or the dialogue that's happening between the characters. And so I've done this a lot, and I bet you have too, is you start skimming. You start skimming to get past, like, yep, I already know that. Your brain starts skipping over the information that has already been made very clear to you at the outset so that you can get to the new stuff. And as a writer, you don't want your reader to be skimming. You want them to be highly engaged with every single thing you're saying. So I think that when we've already set the scene, we've already set the mood, we already have those beautiful descriptions there where they belong, let's try not to bog down dialogue with something we've already told the readers.
Right, exactly. I saw this funny meme one time that was a writing meme that was like a picture. I don't know if I showed you it. It's a picture of like this guy on like a staircase. It was like a pretty short staircase, like 5 or 6 steps. And he was like very dramatically stepping over all the steps, like from the bottom to the very top step. And it was like me skimming through all of the description to get to the dialogue.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so true.
And see, the fact that that's a meme is because it's a real thing that happens in a lot of books.
Yeah. And this is a great question to ask your beta readers. If you have beta readers or alpha readers and you want some feedback, to ask them, what parts did you find yourself skimming? Because they might not even notice, like, oh, that was too wordy or too descriptive. But they will notice what they skimmed, what started to kind of lose their attention. Maybe where they started to lose focus on the story or started to skip ahead to some dialogue. And that can be a good indicator that, okay, we need to trim back some of the stuff that's going on here.
Right. One of the things to remember too is don't get too clammed up about it, because when you go through and edit your book for like the first, second, third time that you're going to be reading through your book, you can always delete that. So sometimes when you're writing, there's like this real urge to write a lot of description. And I know, because I feel that too. And sometimes I will literally be like, I know I'm probably going to take this out, but I'm just going to say this anyway, because I feel like this needs something here. And if I stop and think about it too long, I'm going to lose my train of thought, or I'm going to waste time and not be able to write forward because I'm sitting here like agonizing over whether this is too much description. If that's you, just write it. Just write it and get it out of the way, get it out of your system. And then when you go back, you'll be able to identify like, okay, where is this slowing down dialogue? Where is this slowing down the progression of the scene? And then move, shift, change, delete what needs to be changed. But in the initial writing process, you can just let it all flow and get it out there in the open, and then you can fine tune it later.
Yeah, I agree. I always like to have more rather than less to work with, because then you don't have to do a lot of like rewriting in the second draft or whatever. You can just like delete some things that are not necessary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we're saying is super applicable not only to the writing process, but especially probably even more to the editing process. So when you start going through your first draft, these are great things to keep in mind. When you feel like, this is slowing down the scene a little bit, that would be a good place to implement some of these tips.
Yeah. And another way I think that you can tell if it's slowing down the scene, and this is something I talked about in my pacing video, is how long does it actually take you to read the description? And I think a lot of people, a lot of writers don't really think of it in this term, but this is why I used Screenplays as an example in that video. And I think it's a great thing to learn from, because basically the reason why you don't see a lot of description is because there is kind of this general rule that 1 page of a screenplay equals 1 minute of screen time. So you can't afford to go on and on about, describing a scene. Not only is that just not helpful for the end result, but also it's wasting time. You're spending all this time on something that will only pass probably in the span of like 15 seconds. So there's no need to go through all that description. And actually in that video, I read a section of a screenplay and show you the clip from the corresponding film to show how the description, the time that it takes you to read the screenplay, that section of the screenplay is actually the same as the runtime of the clip in the final product, which is so interesting to me because that's kind of how you want your book to read, right? You want your reader to see it like a movie playing in their mind. And the only way that can happen is if they are basically seeing things happen at the pace at which they read. So that's another thing to keep in mind especially when you're in the editing process, like Kate said, because you don't want to be editing as you're writing and slowing yourself down or discouraging yourself because you're like, I can't get this right. Just go forward. Move forward.
It's kind of two different mindsets, isn't it?
It is.
Because we've talked about that. Like having your editor cap on versus having your writer's cap on feels really different. Yeah. So if you're in the creative writing mood, just write whatever you want. Like I'm such a firm believer in just write whatever you want. And I know me and Abbie do that too. And it's like, make it messy, make it fun, and then go back. Wait a day or two and then go back and read through it. And fine tune. This is where we make it pretty. This is where we make it flow. And a lot of times, like me and Abbie we're working on a co-write right now. A lot of times for us, that's when we read it to each other and then we're like, that sounds like it slows it down a little bit there. And then we critique each other. So you can find what process works best for you, but don't feel like you have to do it all in one go because no one has to do that with writing. There's going to be many passes that you make through this manuscript to make it reach its full potential.
Yeah. And that's really the important thing is like the actual structure, the actual story is the most important part to get down in the first draft. Like make sure you have that figured out because the description, like you said, is like the pretty stuff, making it pretty. It's like the aesthetic appeal, of like a house when you're building a house, but you don't want to reach the stage of building the house where the sheetrock is up and everything's ready to be staged. And then you decide, oh wait, I don't like the layout of this house. Like that's exactly. Not the time to decide that. It's definitely the time for decorating and making things pretty. So, that's very important to keep in mind. Last but definitely not least, when you're writing in first person, or actually when you're writing like anything that's in the point of view of your character, does it match the personality of the character to describe something like this? And this is a question that you can ask yourself as you're writing. And this is about character voice, really. So locking into your character's unique voice and then describing the story and describing the world around them, how they would describe it. So this is something that, honestly, I don't see a lot of writers talk about this.
Yeah.
But it's
this
so
is
important.
An important one.
Yeah, because
this is where you really establish character voice.
Yeah. And it makes the story so much more immersive when you feel like you're sold on the character and their voice and their perspective of the world, and it makes sense how they see things, whether that's, places, settings, people, relationships. How they view the world is going to dramatically impact your writing voice, whether you're switching point of view or not. And when you're switching point of view, you kind of have to like go into the other character's head, which can be a fun challenge, but it's definitely challenging.
Yeah. It is, because you have to really think about, okay, the way I'm describing this, is this how this character would actually think about that thing? Or am I just using them as the sort of vessel to get all this information to the reader, even though it seems clunky and abnormal for them to even think all of this? You know what I mean? So let's say you have a character who is a guy who is super blunt, doesn't really put a lot of thought into things. Maybe he's kind of extroverted, fun-loving, doesn't really think super deep about every single detail, isn't an overthinker at all. And then, he meets a girl and he's not gonna be like, she was wearing this color dress and the trim on the dress looked like this and the jewelry she was wearing looked like this and her hair was highlighted. She was wearing, a little bit of makeup but not too much makeup, and her shoes were, like this, and she sort of carried herself with this confidence and this, had this light, airy vibe. Like a character, if you created a character like that who's blunt, doesn't overthink, he's not going to describe that much stuff. Okay. So, and vice versa. If you have, let's say, another character, someone who's kind of introverted and notices absolutely everything, bit of a like Sherlock type of character, it's going to feel like, yeah, he notices like a freakish amount of detail. And so we're going to write all that in. But if they're a character that's like, nah, I don't really notice that stuff, just cut to the chase, on to the next thing, they're not going to stop and be like, whoa, let's think about every aspect of the way this person looks. You know what I mean? So you have to really think, who is it that I'm working with here? And especially when you're changing point of views. And how would they actually describe it? You know what I mean?
And what would they actually notice?
What would they actually notice?
Because there are some things that may be happening that they don't even notice because of their character,
Exactly. So, and then it might be interesting because you switch point of view to a character who will notice those things. And it's like, oh, we learn more details through this character instead of learning it all through this character who's really, kind of flippant and blunt, doesn't notice a lot of stuff, is more focused on their own game.
Right.
So you have to really think about, what is your character's voice like? What is their personality like? Do they notice things like that? Do they walk into a room, especially characters walking into a room, are they going to notice like, oh, the walls are upholstered with, this type of paneling and the furniture looks like this and the wallpaper looks like this and there's this many people in the room? Most people don't notice that kind of stuff when they walk into a room. So you have to ask yourself, is my character super observant like this? Would they notice all this detail and describe it in this much depth? Or would they kind of just breeze through like, oh, I walk into the room's kind of dark, there's a few people here and there. Would they describe it more like that? So these are things that bring your character's voice and their flavor to the description rather than just using them as a vessel to info dump to the reader.
Right. And letting your own voice come through a lot. And that's something like a way that you can think about it if you're struggling to do this, to lock into character voice, is just think of this character's chapters as they're talking to themselves. So like, how would they talk to themselves? How would they observe the world and like almost tell themselves this story as it's unfolding? Obviously, when they're having dialogue with other characters, they're engaging with other characters. But even when they're having dialogue, I mean, there's so much room for misinterpretation in just like gestures and face expressions. And maybe this character is like deeply insecure, okay? And as they have interactions with another character, they are assigning thoughts and emotions to the other character that the other character isn't even feeling. Like, oh, they sigh before they say something to me, and I know that they're annoyed with me and they think I'm stupid. And it's like maybe the other character doesn't even think that, but this first character thinks that about themselves. So you're revealing not only character voice, but you're thinking like, you're revealing internal conflict, really, through the interactions and through the way this character interprets the world. And that's why it's so important to sink into their mind, their point of view. How do they interact? How do they see the world? And how do they see themselves? And that's why I put such an emphasis on character creation all the time, because if you can really flesh out this character and understand where they come from, not just the things that have happened to them, but how those things have changed them, how it has shaped who they are today and how they see themselves. What is their fatal flaw? What is the lie they believe about the world and about themselves? And that is the lens through which they see everything. Everything that happens to them, every person who interacts with them, they're seeing it through that lens. So what does that look like on paper? And that can be fun to explore. And I've seen some people recommend, before you sit down to write a character's point of view, write just like a page, like free write a page of like a journal entry of something that they would write to themselves. And I thought that's an interesting idea for an exercise. I've never done it before, but it seems like it would be helpful to lock into character voice, because you're getting right into their emotions, right? And into kind of the voice they use to speak to themselves and to process their own thoughts and emotions. So that's a huge element, I think, of description and narrative, the in-between stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a really good exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And think of it this way too, because a lot of you guys will be able to relate to this, is think of pick a few like family members in your head or a few friends. And think of like if you all went and had an experience of something, you went to a theme park, you went to a museum, and then think of how each of those like family members or friends would describe that event, or pick a few things. You would probably think like, oh, I know so-and-so would notice this, or I know so-and-so would notice that, or focus on that thing way more. Think about the diversity in those descriptions that you would get from your own family members or your own close friends, and how there would be huge differences in what they would notice or what they would even pay attention to.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with your characters. You would have that same diversity of opinion and personality and what they would notice and what they would be thinking about and whether or not they would be paying a lot of attention to certain things or not. So you want your characters to feel just as real as the real people in your life. So that can be a good way to think about it.
Yeah, for sure. So, going off of everything that we've talked about today, Kate and I have prepared a printable for you guys that you can follow like a guide, that you can ask yourself these questions and kind of use this as an exercise to take everything, all the techniques and all the tips that we've talked about today, and kind of put it into practice in your own writing using these questions. And do you want to read the questions?
Yeah,
here?
Let's read the questions out here.
So first, ask yourself, does this add value to the reader's experience? Does the reader need to know this about what I'm describing, whatever it is, the detail that you're pointing the lens at? Is it on topic with this scene, or is it distracting from the main point or what is actually going on? And if it's from first person point of view, does this amount of description match the personality of the character and how they think and their internal conflict? Will this mean anything later on? Is it actually taking away from the rest of what is going on in this scene? And does it draw the reader's attention to something that doesn't matter? So these are questions that you can ask yourself, and the link to that printable, by the way, is in the description box below this video, so you can grab it right now for free and print it off or copy and paste it into your Scrivener document and use it as kind of like a checkpoint. After you write a scene, or in the middle of a scene, maybe you're having trouble setting up the scene and you're not sure what to describe, what to leave out, what details to bring attention to, it can just be a really good reminder to ask yourself these questions and understand whether or not you should point the lens at something, because that's really what it comes down to. And I would say that's
a great way to think about it.
Yeah, that's probably the best takeaway from what we've discussed today, is like noticing that every line you write is pointing the lens at something. So it better matter to what is happening in the scene, and matter to the reader and matter to the characters.
Isn't there some saying too that you've heard before that's like in film, that's like, if you're showing a gun mounted to the wall over the desk, that gun had better be relevant later in the film.
Yeah.
Right. And that's
and that's something your brain looks for.
Isn't that like a filmmaking thing that you heard
I'm not
one
sure.
time?
I think I may have heard it somewhere. I can't remember where I heard it.
But it's like, if you're watching a spy film and it shows like, oh, there's a gun over that person's desk, and you're thinking it's already creating tension just showing that, because you're like, oh, that's going to be relevant somewhere, that's going to be used against the main character at some point in the film. And then if it's never shown again, you're like, why did you show me that?
Yeah.
Fake tension.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Fake tension.
You don't want to create fake tension. So if you're bringing attention to something, it had better have meaning later in the story.
Yeah, 100%. It reminds me also of, I watch a lot of Mission Impossible, the original series, and there's like so much of every episode, like probably the first half of it, if not more, is like just setting things up. And you're watching these characters, you know, setting up what's going to happen in the mission. And your focus is really brought to a lot of different, very specific elements. And then you're waiting. There's like that suspense and anticipation of like, okay, what's that going to be? How is that going to unfold? And as the story comes together, you see how it unfolds. But if those elements were just kind of focused on and then neglected, you'd be like, what happened with that? I was waiting to see what was going to happen. So again, with description, with focus, exactly. You want to focus on the things that are relevant or will be relevant later. So yeah, definitely grab that printable. The link is in the description box below this video. If you're not on YouTube, you can find the YouTube version of this podcast on Kate's YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/KAMens. Definitely go check out the YouTube version so that you can see our lovely faces and interact in the comments, and also follow Kate's channel because she has amazing videos as well. And I know that Kate has some very exciting news coming soon about her own publishing.
I have a book coming out super soon. So I'll be able to release the release date really soon. The cover, some info about the book. It is the last book in my series, The Blood Race. It's a sort of follow-up duology, and it's the very last book, the final book, kind of the closing of the chapter of The Blood Race, and it's going to be released this September, and I'll have more dates and info really soon on that. And Abbie and I are working on our co-write. Yes. And if you want to get updates about that, if you want to be in on like when we start talking about release dates and more concrete stuff like that, and even just little writing updates, who knows, maybe we'll send out like just little updates about how we're doing. We want to start interacting with you guys more on that. So if you've been following along on this journey and you're like, hey, I want to stay up to date on what you guys are writing with this amazing co-write project, sign up for our email list. We're going to create an email list. You'll find the link in the description of the video version of this podcast, and you can follow along with our writing journey, hearing from Abbie and I occasionally. And of course, most importantly, when it's ready to release, you'll be the first person to know, maybe even have a chance to be an advanced reader. Who knows? Yeah. We have all sorts of stuff that we're running through our minds, trying to figure out, you know, how we're going to release the book and start the series. And you guys have been with us for every step of that journey, hearing about all of it, like since chapter 1. So we wanted to extend this invite to you guys to be the first on that inner circle email list so that you can hear all those updates before anybody else does. That would be the first place we send out anything, before social media or videos or any of it. So be sure you get on that email list, because we would love to be able to chat with you and get you info before we release it anywhere else.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I'm looking forward to sharing it with the world. It's going to be so much fun. It's been a really fun journey to write this book. These books. We're on the second. We're drafting the second one right now. So we want to pace ourselves and make sure that we are ready to launch when the launch day does come. So that's going to be an exciting time. So definitely looking forward to that. And in the meantime, definitely stick around and check out Kate's final book in her series. It's going to be epic. And also stick around on my channel, because I'm going to be releasing some exciting new content for you guys soon. I'm working on some new masterclasses and new live trainings, and I'm really excited to share it all with you guys. It's going to be great.
Yeah, your live trainings have been like such a cool experience to watch that grow. So like real quick though, like if someone wants to opt into like start with you on a live training, like how do they do that?
Go to my Patreon. So patreon.com/AbbieEmens and get inside that community there. That's where I do my live trainings every single month. That's also where you can get exclusive content, like the Discord community, which is such a cool, vibrant community of so many writers, and it's awesome to see that community grow. I'm in there a lot myself, doing writing sprints, chatting with you guys, so it's kind of an exclusive little writers clubhouse. There's also a lot of resources like templates, and all of my resources, everything I share on my channel, my Scrivener template and writing templates, story structures, character arcs, all the stuff that I talk about on my channel. So lots of value there.
Heaps of resources.
Yeah.
And also your live trainings have kind of a cool vibe to them too, because it's similar to your YouTube channel, obviously, because you're talking about all these great writing topics that you always talk about in Writer's Life Wednesdays and Science of Story. But it's a little more like a class.
Yeah.
And it has this interactive element because it's live.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's kind of taking it to almost the next level because you have that element of interaction, like we're sitting down with you while you teach us these principles and talk about, all these amazing topics, and we can sort of like ask questions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's a really cool format, I think. That sets it apart from your YouTube channel. So I think it's like a great next step for someone who's like, hey, I watch your channel all the time. I listen to the Kate and Abbie show. What's like the next step? I want to like be more part of a community. It feels like you're literally going to like a writer's retreat and sitting down at a workshop. That's really a good word to describe it. Is they're like kind of like workshops.
Yeah, they are a bit. They are for sure. And yeah, it's more in depth, like you were saying. I usually teach for like 30 to 40 minutes, sometimes 45 to 50 minutes, because I get carried away sometimes. And then we always have like a 10 to 15 minute Q&A at the end where I answer your questions and we dive deeper into these elements. And it's really amazing because we get to interact on a closer level. So a lot of times we just don't have the chance to chat about your specific stories and work out these problems. That's something that's more reserved for, Ask Abbie, and I only randomly choose a few questions each month. So it's a unique opportunity, definitely, when you're part of the live training to engage with me and to get my personal advice and feedback on these particular elements of your story, in keeping with the theme of the live training. So yeah, it's fun and explorative. I've even learned a lot doing these and helping you guys to come closer to achieving your author dreams. So I hope to see you on the next one. The next one's probably going to be happening this Saturday. Stay tuned on my channel for more dates and specifics about that for sure. YouTube.com/Abbie Emmons if you don't follow there already. And thank you again to our amazing sponsors who help us to keep this show alive. We love you guys so much. Thanks for helping us keep this podcast interruption-free, sponsorship-free. You guys are the sponsors and we so appreciate your help. So if you get value out of this show, go to patreon.com/The Kate and Abbie Show and help us keep it alive and free of interruptions. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Comment below and join the discussion. Tell us what you thought of this episode. We love to hear from you guys. We'd love to hear your thoughts on description and character voice and pacing, everything that we've discussed today. And don't forget to grab the printable that's linked below this video as well. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. Until then,
stay stoked
and rock on.